Okay,
All right.
and we're live. Hello, everybody. This
Yay.
is Hack
Okay.
Chat. There's two things this week. We're doing a simulcast. It's the 6 months in with the ESP32-S2, and then also first look at the RP2040, which is a new chip from Raspberry Pi. And we got a bunch of stuff going on with both of those chips. It's a wonderful time to be a maker. How often can you say, oh my gosh, there's so many new chips, e-ink, low power, $4 dev boards, all this stuff is running Python on microcontrollers. It's here. And on our team on this side, we've got Scott and Lamore and Dan and Jepler and Kenny.
Dude, this is like superhero team.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will. I'll ask for questions, and then Scott and Dan and Jeff and Kenny, maybe I'll interview you to get people started. Okay. So Scott here. Want to introduce yourself real fast for the folks who may not know you?
Hello, my name is Scott. I was the first kind of full-time hire on MicroPython for Adafruit, so I'm kind of like the de facto lead of the project. You can blame me for why it's called CircuitPython. Yeah, been working on it for 4 years now. So doing a lot of work on both the S2 and the RP2040, so I'm happy to answer questions. And yeah, you can blame me for everything.
No, I mean, that's the thing I always say, right? Like, if you have a problem with Adafruit, it's my fault. But if you have a problem with CircuitPython, it's Scott's fault.
Okay. Don't worry, someday I'll blame Lamore no matter what.
Blame me too. Somehow I don't do any of the engineering, and yet all the technical decisions are my fault.
Yeah,
next up is Dan. Dan, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dan Halbert, and I also am a core developer on CircuitPython. I started working on CircuitPython in 2017, and then joined Adafruit to work on CircuitPython for pay later in 2017. I've been having a great time since then.
Dan fixes all my bugs.
Right. Not right, but Scott fixes my bugs too. But
no, I think, well, here's what I gotta say about Dan. Dan, you know how when folks talk about like really cute dogs like corgis, and they're like, oh yeah, they were bred to like go into burrows and get badgers. That's like you, but with bugs.
That's right. I'm kind of like I chew on bugs for a long time.
Okay, we did get a question. How about we just finish the intros and we'll circle back.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, Jeff Epler, also known as the Jepler.
Hi. So I've had a love of Python since the 90s. And when I found out about CircuitPython, I thought, now I can bring together microcontrollers and a language that I love, because I don't love C or C++. But primarily, and since about 1.5 years ago, I work on the core of CircuitPython, which is in C for Adafruit. And it's a lot of fun, but also a lot of challenges, whether that's figuring out subtle things or in the code, or subtle things in a data sheet. And it's a different thing every day. And I'm really thankful for the variety that brings.
Okay. We also have Katney.
Hello.
Hi, Katney. Tell us what you're up to.
So I'm Katney. I work with the CircuitPython team. I work primarily on the libraries and documentation. I've been with Adafruit since 2017, and that was the same year that I picked up programming and electronics as well. And that's how I got started.
Lots of guys. Okay, and it's me, Lady Ada. Everything's my fault. Okay, let's get to the questions. We started off. We've got a question from YouTube. How is the ADC on the S2? What a question. Well, who wants to field that one?
I think Lucian, who actually works with us as well, is probably the best to answer that. There's been a lot of discussion, particularly around missing the range from 2.6 to 3.3 volts. They've been doing a lot of work to make it better, but it's definitely not as good as some of the other ports that we do support.
Yeah, it's like it does work, but if you're used to other ARM core microcontrollers that are like, it's just they have this beautiful ADC that just gives you a totally linear value, you're not necessarily going to get that, but we are getting good data out of it, and we're working on it. Okay.
So one of the questions was, we want to mix it up with the RP2040 and the ESP32-S2. I say mix it up because
Mix it like a
yeah,
big
let's
salad.
maximize the time. Someone did ask in YouTube OTA over the air with ESP32.
OTA, yeah, we actually have a PR in Circuit Python for OTA, right? I think, Scott, you were merging
Is it merged? So props to MicroDev1, who has actually come into our community and done a lot of the work on the S2. They've added the ability to do OTA. I think it's merged in. So you could check that out. I haven't tried it myself, but that would allow you to like replace CircuitPython proper. And then we do have a PR that's pending around like allowing you to run a file that's not code.py. So if you want to do like Python level OTA, you'd be able to do it using that mechanic instead.
And we'll try to let's also try to make sure we put the answer in the chat too.
I'm typing in the
yeah,
answer.
you got it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it all, so you don't have to worry about it. And one thing I want to mention is when we started working on the S2, you purposefully divided up the memory to make OTA possible. You want to just chat about that, like how you divide up firmware?
Yeah, I think it was with a new port to CircuitPython, we have to kind of decide how big all of our partitions are going to be in the flash, and that's not something you want to change over time because you can like clobber the file system and cause a lot of havoc. So when we were picking up that division for the S2, we did decide to make sure there was 2 slots available. So I think it is actually called a dual bank module in CircuitPython that allows you to do the OTA stuff. But yeah, we knew people would want to do that.
Which is really good. It means that you can have a backup. So you have your main 1 megabyte of firmware, 1 megabyte for OTA, and then you have backup OTA because one thing you can learn real fast from doing anything with OTA, especially stuff you buy, is that it gets bricked. I mean, I remember reading about like people would buy these like over-the-air updated light bulbs and they would break from an update. So having that secondary bank is important. But it means that that's why the disk drive, the CircuitPython disk drive on the ESP32-S2 is smaller.
Right, and that's the trade-off. We did make a similar trade-off for the RP2040 as well. Like when you and I were discussing what the final partition layout would be, is we actually decided to give, because it's there, this similarity between the S2 and the RP2040 is they both do execute in place on external flash chips. Which means you can assume that you have about 2 megabytes of flash or more. So with the RP2040, what we chose to do is we actually allocate a whole megabyte, which is like 4 times what we do on a SAMD21, just for the internal CircuitPython code, which should allow us a lot of room to grow as we add more functionality for the RP2040.
1 megabyte flash, so lots of room to grow. Okay, cool. I think we had a couple more questions.
Yeah, there was a question about the ESP RISC-V C3 plans. Well, yeah, we'll have something eventually.
We are on the list to get samples. I have literally not seen this chip yet, but we will check it out. I don't know exactly what we're going to do. It doesn't have native USB, right, Scott? So it has this thing. So we might not port CircuitPython to it, but I definitely want to check it out.
One of the big things I want to do this year for CircuitPython is support workflow where you're editing Python over BLE, and that will unlock this, the microbit V2, and the ESP32 potentially. So that's kind of a prerequisite for doing the C3.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, like it seems super neat. I'm really into RISC-V. I think it's it's a really interesting new architecture. Dan, you want to tell us about how you worked on RISC-V, so you can take credit for this?
Yeah, I worked on RISC-1, not RISC-V. So when I was a grad student at Berkeley in 1980 or so, I worked on the register windows with another person. We sort of co-invented the register window scheme, which was later used on the SunSpark chips and is still present on the RISC chips in the Extensa.
Okay. So you get 0.000001 cent for every. No, just kidding.
I wish. We didn't even make a patent. Yeah.
Okay, Paul asks, I was disappointed to see that the RP2040 was an ARM and not RISC-V. Any thoughts about that? Well, I want to say we don't speak for the Raspberry Pi Foundation or why they chose it. But I will say that RISC-V is really cool. I think I'm sure they looked at RISC-V. If I had to guess why they picked the Cortex M0 is there's a lot of support for the chip, and it's really cheap to get started. I think, what is it, like $50,000 to get a license to get started with developing on a Cortex M0. It's something like really small compared to other cores. Yeah, RISC-V is free, but with ARM Cortex, I think that they had something that they wanted to be confident that they would be able to get it out, and this is a very tried and true chip core. And I think, I'm sure they're thinking about moving to RISC-V at some point. But honestly, if it's my first chip, I would also go with tried and true, right? You go to a new restaurant, go with something that you know is going to be good. And then the second time you show up, you can get the weird thing.
I think it's also important to note that RISC-V itself is not a CPU core. It's the API to a CPU core. And it's like calling a Cortex M0 an ARM v6, because the ARM v6 is the ISA that it implements. I think the actual core implementations of the RISC-V ISA are just like really young still. It's just not as mature as ARM Cortex are. And I think if you look in the RP2040 as well, they license additional things from ARM too. So like I think the SPI and the I2C controllers are from ARM as well, if I remember right.
Yeah, I think they, look, the thing about the RP2040 is these PIOs, right? That's the crown jewel. But you still, if you have a crown jewel, you still have to have all these other jewels to support your crown, right? I don't know anything about crowns, but so you have to have the UART, the SPI, the I2C. It could be that they're like, they got a package deal. They knew that they didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. Dual core support, all managed, well managed. The bus fabric all taken care of, and they, maybe the person who worked on this was also really comfortable with this chip. They already had worked on something with it, so I think that's probably why.
Right, and there's like multiple years of work that went into this, right? So like RISC-V sounds like a like better option now than it probably did 3 years ago or 4 years ago when they may have started.
Yeah, I don't think they picked it just because both are in the UK. There's a lot of technical reasons why you would do something beyond just like, hey, they're in the same country. But you should, if you really want to know though, you got to ask the Pi Foundation, because they'll Eben will know for sure, right? They picked it, and they're very responsive. I've noticed that people post up in the Pico feedback GitHub repo, and they answer questions. So.
All right, I'll put this one in the chat. Someone wants to know, does ESP32-S2 accept and charge a Lipo battery?
The chip itself doesn't, but the boards that we have made with the ESP32-S2, you just add a 10-cent charger chip. And yeah, I mean, what's cool about the S2 is you can go into very low power modes and go to sleep for days or whatever, while the real-time clock keeps track of time, and it'll wake you up. So running off of a battery, it'll do a really good job at it.
All right, I'll put that in there. You can answer that one in the chat, Lamar.
And so, for example, Adafruit MagTag does have the battery charging circuit you're describing, and a feather format board would as well.
Okay, sorry, I'm like 3 windows. Okay, let me answer the Lipo battery question, and then y'all can answer the next one. So Phil, maybe give them one that they can do.
Yeah, let's go. Besides the coolness factor, what advantages would CircuitPython users see with the 2040 over, say, a Feather M4?
Wow, great question for Scott and Dan and Kenny to answer.
Yeah, just put some of it in one of the chats.
So I think the coolness, I think, about the 2040 comes from it's designed to really chew. I think of it as like ingesting and transmitting data. The PIOs, like we've said, they're very good at doing very predictable timing tasks, which makes it easy to get data in and out to other things. One example I saw somebody doing in our Discord was that they were wanting to just have it be like acts like a shift register, and that's something like that's totally doable. So I think between that and the fact that like it is dual core, and we've started thinking about how to do the second core in CircuitPython as well, and I think it's the first time I've felt like CircuitPython can be part of a chip and orchestrate the rest of it, rather than being the only thing that's running on it, kind of more apparently in terms of code wise. So I think it's we're going to see, and it's going to be good for some things, and the M4 is going to be better for other things, particularly like floating point math will be faster on the M4.
Yeah.
So, Scott, do you know whether MicroPython is doing anything with the second M0 core? And like, are you at the point where you could contrast how CircuitPython will think about it versus MicroPython?
So MicroPython's using the second core via the thread module that is a standard module in CPython as well. That is certainly an option for us. We haven't really like made sure that works in CircuitPython. But I've been thinking about it more from the perspective of PIOs are really interesting, where you're writing like very compact assembly to do real-time tasks. And part of me actually really likes the idea of treating the Cortex M0 in the same way, where you're actually writing ARM assembly and loading it dynamically onto that second core. Because the cores are connected in a way, I believe, that you can control the second core from the first core. So we could do like SWD and debug stuff of the second core and really use it as a very fast, dedicated coprocessor instead of just running Python on yet another core. Which kind of fits into my philosophy of like CircuitPython's job is to orchestrate things. It's not to just be the only thing that you use.
All right, and I will answer.
I typed that into the chat.
Yeah.
But you can add some more if you want.
I'll answer this part of another question from YouTube. Any word on Arduino support for the RP2040? Arduino has a blog post, and they said shortly. So whatever shortly means in Arduino time.
Yeah, they are the pros at it, of course, because they invented it. So we're going to definitely leave that to them. One really cool thing, it's funny because I've asked on the developer list for a long time, is the official USB core for the RP2040 is TinyUSB, as is for the ESP32-S2. So that's kind of maybe the glue that holds this chat together. These are both running TinyUSB, a totally open cross-platform USB stack. And having TinyUSB support in Arduino would be awesome because TinyUSB has like a lot more peripheral support for stuff like mass storage or like audio devices, or like complicated composite things with HID, and especially the mass storage. I always felt like that was something missing from Arduino. If you have a data logger with an SD card, why doesn't it show up when you plug it in as a disk drive? Like, why do you have to remove the SD card instead? So I think that's going to be really sweet if TinyUSB does get support within Arduino.
All right, I put a link to the blog post in the Hack Chat. And another question, will the ESP32-S2 be part of Circuit Playground Express? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, definitely. Especially the one, there's a chip coming out that has both flash and PSRAM built in. You kind of need the PSRAM. Like, you can do stuff without the PSRAM on the S2 in CircuitPython, but you get limited quite fast because you only have 300K. So that extra 2 megabytes is it's not essential, but it's like the icing on the cake, and the cake is kind of dry without the icing. So when that chip is available, that's going to be an awesome chip for Circuit Playground because you have enough RAM to really do Wi-Fi stuff. You get the built-in flash, so it all fits in the same board. I want to make it the same size and have all the buttons in the same location.
All right. Then there was another question if folks can check the Hack Chat. Someone talk about the RISC-V ULP in ESP32-S2.
Yeah, have we used it? I don't think we've used it.
I believe Microdev started to look at it, but the support in the IDF wasn't super there yet. This is actually, I'm glad the RP2040 is public now because the RISC-V ULP fits into my this idea of like, okay, well, what if we did like a RISC-V assembler that allowed you to load code onto the ULP? It's just another coprocessor. And so I kind of see it fitting into that model of like how we treat the PIO and how we treat the second Cortex M0. It's an 8. The ULP on the S2 is only 8 megahertz, so you don't really want to run MicroPython on that or CircuitPython on that. And the RAM is much smaller as well. So it really is like if you could write some assembler or some C code that you could then load over there, that would probably be a better experience than trying to get any sort of CircuitPython stuff on it. That being said, we could always ship libraries that have that little snippets of like native code in them, so that for common tasks you wouldn't need to worry about it.
And MicroDev has looked at adding ULP support to the alarm mechanism that we have now, so that you could run the ULP program while you're sleeping and then have it wake you up when it decides that it's time to do that.
Okay, cool. All right, here's another question. Maybe I missed something that was answered already. CircuitPython was missing some stuff on Cortex M0 before that prevented some modules from working because the chips were considered too small. Will the RP2040 build of CircuitPython have all the features, data types, etc.?
Yeah, so I think this is a bit of a confusion from our branding of the Feather M0s, where the Feather M0s are really SAMD21s. And that the core itself is similar to what is in the RP2040, but it's important to note the RP2040 has, so one of the constraints of the SAMD21 is the 256K of onboard flash, and the non-express boards use 64K of that for the file system. We don't have that limitation with the RP2040 because we use external flash, which is like 2 megabytes. And we've dedicated 1 megabyte of that to CircuitPython. So in terms of code size that CircuitPython going to have natively, we have a megabyte to play with, which is 4 times what we have on the SAMD21. And then the other thing is that RAM-wise, we have a lot more RAM on the RP2040 as well. So the SAMD21, which we call the M0, is 32K RAM, whereas the RP2040 is 264K of RAM. We only use 256K of that right now. I'm kind of like squirreling away 8K in case we want it for the second core. Surprise. But yeah, you're going to be able to import more code. We're going to be able to have more code in native CircuitPython. So yeah, it's going to be a better experience than the SAMD21. And it's the Cortex M0s on the 21 are clocked at 48 megahertz, whereas we're clocking the RP2040s at 125 megahertz. So you're going to see a speed up as well.
All right, Lamar put some of that text in, but try to put it in the hack chat if you can too.
Yeah, I got it. I think so.
You got it?
Yeah.
So for instance, we enabled Microlab on the Raspberry Pi RP2040, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it has full, you have JSON, you have regular expressions. I did a Wi-Fi project really easily, connect to the internet, and you can do Ethernet. So pretty much any CircuitPython library. I can't think of a single CircuitPython library and project that wouldn't fit.
I mean, I think one of the reasons we bumped it to a meg is we were actually considering the TensorFlow Lite stuff.
Yeah, which is
that's a very long-term, thing we might want to do in the long term, but we wanted to make sure we didn't rule that out. And for what I can tell, most boards are actually coming with more than 2 megabytes of flash as well. So if you had a 16 megabyte flash chip on the board, we'd still only use the first megabyte for CircuitPython. So you'd have 15 for your drive.
All right. Someone's asking about the STM32. We do have STM32.
All right, let's add a new challenger. So STM32 support. Do we has it?
Yes. It's definitely not something that we work a lot on.
Okay.
And we only have a few Adafruit boards that we have it on to support.
I think we support the F4. Do we support the F7?
We call the F4 stable and the rest are unstable. So like alpha build.
I think we have F1.
We have a number of them. The best place to check is actually
check the
just looking
downloads
at the downloads page.
I was like thinking, like, I'm going to download.
Okay, and then in the YouTube chat, I'll type this in Hack Chat. As someone who's currently developing a battery-operated IoT sensor with the ESP32, is the ESP32-S2 worth switching over to? Is the time commitment to switching worth it? I would say if you can switch now, yeah.
I mean, my answer is USB is great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
Native USB makes it worth it.
the S2, you don't have that extra USB serial converter, so you will save a little bit of money because you don't have that extra thing. It's only one core, which I don't know if you need 2 cores, but it's extremely affordable. We like the S2. All the code that would run on the the ESP32. Other than the very highest end stuff that requires dual core, like there are some things that don't run because they have like this dual core requirement. But if you don't need that, then the S2 I think is super fun. Okay, RGM asks, what ideas excite you about using the RP2040 PIO features beyond implementing RGB LED timing protocols? All right, Scott, you want to answer that one? I'll
Sure.
type the questions.
We currently support NeoPixel with CircuitPython under the hood using PIO. So the question is, what could we do besides that? And I think my personal experience is actually coming from, I tried to use a SAMD51 to talk to a Game Boy. I do have a talk from SuperCon, I think, last year, where I was talking about this, and I kind of left it as like, it doesn't always work. There's like some bugs with interfacing. So because the Game Boy is doing a 1 megahertz clock to read data from the cartridge, and like it works mostly, but it doesn't work all the time. And I kind of chalk that up to some like non-determinism in the SAMD51. So I'm excited to have the RP2040 for a couple of reasons. One, RP2040, you can have the PIO clocked at 125 megahertz and simply just read pins that fast. So I could use it like a logic analyzer to basically watch the Game Boy bus and keep track of what's going on. Alternatively, I could actually replace the SAMD51 with RP2040 and potentially like use the PIO to do the coordination with the clocks of the Game Boy to spit the data back out. So I think it's largely yet to be seen. A lot of their examples are things that you can do without it. But I think I've seen a couple of people on our Discord already. One person doing like a coordinating pulses for like lasers and cameras, where they have like 5 different pins that they need to like twiddle in a pattern every 15 times a second. So that's really interesting. And then this one about like acting like a shift register is interesting too. So I think it's early, but we're going to see some cool stuff.
Radio chips I've seen that need weird protocols. Anything with an 80 or 6800 protocol interface where you have to like to toggle the read and the write, and like the PIO will take care of that for you. I2S, is one of the protocols that can be implemented with PIO quite easily. And what's neat is that you can do like TDM I2S, which maybe your chip doesn't support. RGB matrices. NeoPixels are a good example because it's an annoying bit bang protocols, but basically like, let's just not do any bit banging at all. Just get rid of that. Anything with PWM, infrared, like non-PWM based, like pulse density modulation stuff. Some chips, if you don't have a PDM peripheral, you can't use PDM devices, but you could use a PIO for PDM.
All right, I took care of an easy one. Any plans for a large ESP32 S2 e-ink display, MagTag, but size of PyPortal? Yes, and also probably some other types of displays like the Sharp displays. Other permutations of it. We also have some round displays and some like really weird long displays. So pretty much anything that can display something. Now that we get the low power stuff, we still have our mag tags on our refrigerator. I think it's been a month now, and they're still going.
Yeah,
So,
once
like,
per month. It's
it
like
works.
it's perfect.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
any type of odd display or interesting display, we'll probably have. Color ink, we'll have that as well.
Yeah, and one thing I like is you know, having a PIO do it. It's also like a really easy way to do DMA. I think like, you know, it's having to deal with DMA on a lot of chips. Some chips it's like, wow, this was a joy, and some chips it's like, I hate myself and I hate the world and I want to die. And I think PIO does a really good job of making it, of solving. You know, this is something people always ask us, like, why doesn't CircuitPython do this and this and this? And we're like, well, what are you actually trying to do? Right? And then it's like, well, how do we solve that problem not using maybe the traditional technology, but like a technology that just solves your problem? And I think PIO is a cool disruptive way of looking at like, well, how do we actually solve this problem, which is bit banging. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter how fast your chip is, when suddenly you have to just sit around and wait for a clock to go high or like low, and you have to, you know, your timing peripheral doesn't do exactly what you want. You have to just sit there and bit bang this protocol. It's a total waste of a CPU. So this solves that problem in a kind of a orthogonal way. I should wear my Bitbanger t-shirt.
There was a question I saw go by. I think it was kind of asking about the form factor of the Pico. What's interesting about it, and do we think there'll be an ecosystem around the form factor?
Well, Pimoroni already started doing like these boards, you know, that plug into it. So I think we'll see some of that. And for $4, you might just see it embedded inside of something.
Yeah, I think they
place it on the board.
What I thought was funny is they made it 2x20, kind of like the 2x20 header for the Raspberry Pi. It's not the exact same pinout, but it's like, I thought that was kind of cute that they did that. I think they just wanted to have all the pins exposed, and they were like, what's a low cost, you know, shape? I think they wanted to go as bland and generic as possible. They're psyched that we were going to make a feather, but I think they were like, we don't want to step on your toes and make a feather, right? That's something you're going to do, and like, it was obvious that I would do that. So I think that's why they didn't try to use an existing shape. Yeah,
there's 2 feather compatible RP2040s announced. One is from Adafruit and one is from SparkFun. They call their feather thing feather compatible.
Okay, I'm going to type up these things. Todd says, I'm very excited to start playing with the PIO stuff, like weird alternatives to PWM to do analog out. Yeah, you can, like I'm saying, PDM is like way superior to PWM, but for output. But most chips don't have a PDM output peripheral. In fact, I've never seen a PDM output peripheral. But you're going to get better audio quality than just plain PWM.
That being said, I'm working on plain PWM.
No, I mean, like, you should do that because it's easiest. But like, you know, and it doesn't make sense to implement that when no other chip can do it. But if you're just like dorking around, then that's a good way to do it.
I'm not sure exactly how you would do PDM with a PIO without doing some fancy like pre-processing. The PIO can do some very weird tricks, like it can actually execute data that is shifted in. So theoretically, you could like write to RAM like all the commands you want it to run, and then it will run them that way. It's very weird.
Okay, well, AT Maker, Spill Bingo says, is there any documentation or good example of PIO that we can take a look at? Dan already said there's a NeoPixel implementation in CircuitPython that uses PIO. Nathan, thanks, posted up some doc examples from CNXsoft. There's also some in the RP2040 datasheet. Speaking of, why don't we talk about some of this documentation in the RP2040? Because y'all said you liked it. What do you think is good about the documentation? or not? I don't know.
Well, I think when I first saw it, the first thing that I saw is that for the peripherals that they've licensed, they tell you what they've licensed and what configuration it has. So I have this dream of like I have this dream of like CircuitPython moving away from like chip families and really just being like, here's the IP that runs SPI, here's the IP that runs I2C, and like really recognizing that a system on a chip is like a SPI peripheral on a chip is similar to an I2C sensor. Like it's the same idea, you just talk to it in a different way. So the fact that they were public with that is really great. And then they just have really extensive documentation about all the registers. And they have lots of tutorials as well.
I hear that the data sheet's also pretty funny. They like slip some jokes in.
Yeah. It's very British humor, I think.
All right, there's a question in the hack chat about the ESP32-S2 low power modes. Any real progress over the ESP32? So we have
Dan,
Progress over the ESP32?
Yeah.
I think, is it better? I mean, like, it works.
I don't know. We don't have very much experience with the ESP32.
I think you can compare the numbers. I mean, we've done videos where we show off like sleep modes. I know. What, Dan? Did you work on the wake up mode from touch and from button press? You want to talk about that?
I didn't do touch. Microdev did touch, but I understand how it works. I mean, the sleep modes are pretty nice, and the lowest reasonable sleep mode is about 25 microamps, which is certainly fine. As you mentioned, the refrigerator thing is going fine. So we're happy with the current modes. If you want to enable wake up on touch or wake up on pin change, then you end up drawing a lot more current. So doing time sleep or maybe doing PIO, I mean not PIO, ULP kind of sleep might be the cheapest in terms of current consumption.
Okay. Bill asks, would cap touch benefit from PIO? Scott, is there like, would you be able to set a pin and then get like an interrupt or callback when the pin goes high, or I don't even know.
Yeah, I think we could probably use like PIO instructions to like set the pin high and then count how long it takes for it to go low, which I think is how you bit bang touch IO.
Yeah. You like set it high and then release it and then see how long it takes to drift down.
Right.
Which is a very like bit bangy operation. Like you're sitting there and you're just like, is it done? Is it done? Is it done? Like you usually use a timer peripheral, or you just sit there and wait.
Yeah, I think you would be able to do that. I think right now we just have it set up to use the bit bang from the CPU. But if we wanted to be able to monitor it, we could do it with a PIO because it could do it, perpetually. The problem is that you wouldn't actually be able to, like, there's very limited comparisons. Like, there's no ALU, I don't think, in the PIO, so you can't say, like, count how long until it goes down and then compare if it's above this threshold. Like, you wouldn't be able to do that in a PIO on its own.
Yeah. I think PIO would, one thing I thought, what about like PS2, right? That's always the protocol, the total pain to interface with. Or somebody was doing bit bang CAN bus, which I thought is like genius. Like, of course, like why not?
Oops.
Or maybe one wire or the dreaded DHT11 or something.
Yeah, those would be. Yeah, DHT, you have to do a pulse and then read. I think that would. I mean, I think that there's an example for that in the PIO. I mean, like the thing, of course, that they like to show off with the PIO is it can do VGA, it can do TFT.
If you clock at 250 megahertz.
Okay, yeah, but why not, right? And then they've got RGB matrices, so stuff that you would normally need to really take advantage of some waveform generator on your chip, or a lot of timers.
Yeah, the PWM peripherals in the RP2040 can do capture as well. So you don't necessarily need PIO for pulse length measurements.
All right, from YouTube, which CircuitPython target is best at deep sleep?
The answer is it's only implemented on the ESP32-S2 right now, so that's the best.
But I think the Nordic would be really good when we get
Nordic is going to be really, really good. It's going to be
Nordic. That's like it's designed for that.
So I think Nordic's pretty good at now, actually. I I heard that it got a lot better just with the, like right now when we do time.sleep, we'll actually sleep the core, and I think that actually made a pretty big difference just on the NRF.
So Nordic 52840 next.
That's like, I mean, it's the lowest power chip that's designed to be low power, right? It's
Yeah.
used in like tiles and sensor nodes that you know, it's meant to be into deep sleep. I don't know what the numbers are, but I imagine it's going to be like, you know, single digit microamps when it's in sleep mode.
I think our plan for implementing that is we're gonna have. I asked Lucian to do it after he finishes the TCP server stuff, and he'll probably start with STM. So if you think we hate STM, you're wrong. We'll probably start with STM because that's what he's most familiar with, and then that will get him comfortable with how to hook it into CircuitPython, and then we can go to a port like the NRF, and he'll know the CircuitPython side at that point, and then be able to apply it to the NRF.
Yeah, I think for ESP32-S2, we got as low as 35 microamps deep sleep. So we got it, you know, we got it working in RTC deep sleep. So it would still would wake up, but I think 35 microamp is the lowest you can get. Okay, cool. Well, you know what? Here's another thing. This is a good opportunity. If someone wants to help add deep sleep support for the NRF52840, I mean, like obviously we're already so excited juggling adding ESP32-S2 and adding RP2040. We always welcome contributions, and we will help people, you know, get folks to do pull requests and get them merged and accepted. So if you're like, oh, I really want to do this, but the only thing I'm waiting for is deep sleep, come on by and we'll help you add deep sleep, and you'll be rewarded with gracious thank yous. Okay, Paul asks, RP2040 documentation features SWD debugging front and center, name and supply firmware to use a second Pico as an SWD interface. This is a different strategy from Arduino. Is this good or bad? Does this mean Pico is aiming for a different part of the market? What do you think, Dan and Scott? I think both of you have actually used the SWD debugging, right?
I like having access generally. So I'm excited to play with it more. I think it's an artifact. I think one thing you have to consider with Raspberry Pi is that they do have a lot of industrial customers. And that becomes apparent with the Pico, and that it's like the Pico comes in a reel and it has castellations. So I think one of the reasons they're so open on the C, like low level side, is because they do expect industrial folks to work at that level.
Also look at their past strategy. You know, they got a Raspberry Pi, and then they came out with like the Raspberry Pi compute module. Like,
I think one thing I gotta warn people: don't look at stuff from the Raspberry Pi Foundation and say, "Oh, it's a toy." Okay, that toy is gonna eat your face off if you're not careful. They really like to, you know, be very cute and be like, this is a little computer, $35. And then it's just like, okay, half of like the industrial computing market is using this thing. So slow and steady, but deadly toys, very sharp teeth. It's like that scene in Barbarella, you know.
Well, we have a similar, I think, thing that comes up with, we make it really easy and people are like, oh, like you're making it so easy for people to get, you know, something to light up. And that's the whole point. Like, it should be easy to get industrial hardware into anything, and that hardware should also be easy to use. I mean, that's the goal. It should never be like only like, I measure things in terms of like Hack Chats or even Hackaday. When I started Hackaday, it was like $300 or $400 for a dev board, and now we have a Hack Chat where it's like, hey, what less than $4 thing do you want to like drive e-ink displays and do low power and, you know, do just about anything you want? Like, it's incredible the amount of choices we have.
I also, like, if you love J-Link, like I love J-Links, there will be J-Link support for this, right? And I think that they were very wise in that they said, well, obviously Seger is going to add support. So why worry about that now? Let's just make sure that we have a way for people to get SWD. I thought it was cool. They're like, here's how to use one Pico to debug another Pico. Like, what a cool hack, right? You just wire up the pins, and I think I did I did try the SWD debugging. I installed on a Raspberry Pi, put 2 GPIO over, and I was able to debug a hard fault somewhere. And I was like, this is cool. Like they made it really easy, even if you don't have, a J-Link, which is, an expensive piece of equipment for some people.
The other kind of interesting, here's where we are, years later, both the Raspberry Pi and the RP2040, you would probably use Python. That's significant. If you just think about a few years ago and you said Raspberry Pi is going to have, before Raspberry Pi came out, there's going to be a low-cost Linux computer, people are going to mostly use Python, and then there's going to be a low-cost microcontroller, that too is going to use Python. That's pretty impressive of how far we've come in just a short period of time.
Okay, Patrick and Nathan ask, why don't you use a buck boost on your boards? That's a great question. I'll tell you exactly why I don't use a buck boost on my boards. Y'all wouldn't pay for it. I think a buck boost is an awesome thing. There are times when I will, put a buck converter, a boost converter on a board. It's funny actually. The CAN Feather has it's not a buck boost. It has a switch cap converter to give you 5 volts from 3 volts, so you can have a CAN bus with plus or minus 5. But the AP2112, which is the LDO I use, I really like the LDO. It has very low dropout, maybe like less than 0.2 volts. It's got over thermal protection. It's a rugged one. I've never really seen anyone burn out their AP2112, and it has 500 milliamp out peak. It's like 10 cents, and for us to be able to make hardware that people are buying, and I have to pay all these people here, and I want to make sure that I can pay people there, I have to charge enough to cover the development costs as well as the hardware. And if I added a buck boost, now I'm not saying I won't ever add one, but if I did, it would add a couple dollars to the price, because I'm not able to get whatever chip that the Raspberry Pi Foundation got. I can't sell things the way the Pi Foundation does. They have a different model, which is a totally valid model, but it's not the model that we have for how they make money. And I can't sell boards at cost, basically, or close to at cost. So it's cool to have a buck boost. I love it. It's cute, but I have to stick with an LDO, because whenever I try to add a boost or buck converter, I always am like, oh boy, like, okay, now every board I'm making is $1 more. Are people willing to pay for it? And the answer is pretty much no, unfortunately. That said, there are other people making dev boards that are compatible with CircuitPython, and they use buck boost converters. So please buy stuff from them.
I think that's an important point to point out, right? Is like CircuitPython and generally the software that goes on these chips is really, really designed for the chip. There's not a lot with board designs that prevent you from using them on other boards. So if you're making your own board with any of the chips that CircuitPython supports, you should get CircuitPython running on it. And we'll put you on the circuitpython.org downloads page. And by that, I mean, you can make a PR to get your board on there. We'd love to have as many boards supporting CircuitPython as we can.
Yeah, one other, okay.
No, go ahead, Phil. I'm still typing.
One other neat thing, and this would probably be another talk down the road, because I think very early on in the chat, someone asked about Rust. And there's like a Rust build for some of these chips. One of the things, if you use the UF2 bootloader, you can do a lot more. Like, you're not stuck with anything. You could have a classroom setting where you're starting off with MakeCode and you're ending up with Python later, or you can even do Arduino. I think before you get a board and you were kind of stuck with whatever it was made to do, that's all it can do. And now you can pretty much, you could go to a block programming, or you can use JavaScript, you can use static Python on MakeCode, you can essentially, flip the switch with how you add CircuitPython to it, and now you've got CircuitPython. There's TinyGo. And so that's one of the other different things. Maybe it's similar to what you were saying, Scott, where like maybe one day it's just like you're choosing your IP that you want, like, oh, like, here's all the things I want it to do. It doesn't really matter what board it is.
Okay, another question. Well, John actually makes a good point. He says, I think RPi made a half good hardware design on purpose of the RP2040 open up and make it better by third parties. And actually, while I don't know for sure, I would agree with that. That's what I think too. I think that they made something that was bare bones. The fact that it only came out with 2 megabytes of flash, I think that in this case, unlike the Raspberry Pi board, right, like your classic Pi 4, where the Broadcom chip you really can't buy, right? It's basically not available to anybody. I couldn't buy them even if I wanted to. But they sell the hardware, the final design. The Pico, I don't believe that they're really in the business of making Picos. I think Picos is a carriage for the RP2040, which is the chip they really want to sell. And honestly, that's a wise decision because chip companies do quite well by just selling a chip. It's a very hands-off process. You basically have one chip fab like TSMC or whoever make your chips. They send out reels, and you're done, right? You do the documentation, but there's no secondary manufacturing you have to deal with, and it's a single source, but that also means that your supply chain's a lot easier. You only have one company to rely on, but it's also the company that everybody relies on. So as long as you're in the queue, you'll be able to get chips out. And I think that's basically what they're doing too. I think the Pico is pick one up. They're super fun, but yeah, they're just doing this to get people to pick up the board. And then you've got all these awesome makers on Tindy and on like Crowd Supply and just with PayPal or whatever selling their designs. And support them. I mean, I saw a whole bunch of makers over the weekend, scramble out their KiCad installs, and they're like, okay, what am I going to design? This is it, getting their creativity because there's enough room for dozens, hundreds of different designs based on these chips. Adafruit, if there's a new chip, we're going to see a feather, right? That's kind of like a given. But there's a lot of other form factors, again, with different power supplies, ones that run off of solar, ones that have built-in Wi-Fi, all sorts of stuff that we may not get to because we don't get to everything. And that's why it's good to support the entire ecology. And is one of the things that I'm most proud of in CircuitPython is that we don't block people from adding boards to CircuitPython support. Anybody can submit a pull request. The only thing is we ask that you don't use somebody else's VID PID because we want to be able to uniquely identify boards for technical reasons. You can get a free one from, maybe the Raspberry Pi Foundation will eventually give them away, but PID.codes gives them away. Once your PR is in, your board will be supported forever. You'll never have to worry about firmware releases. You'll never have to worry about making sure that you get upgraded with every step. I think that's really cool because that's not true of other development systems. But we're very, very welcoming to everybody, and it's not like, oh no, you're competing. Like, come on by. It's a party. The more people who are part of this, the better. And those same folks also end up contributing code back, and I love it. MicroDev has this board that runs ESP32-S2 and did like a ton of pull requests to help add support for the things that they thought would be really useful. So I think when we all work together, open source software, open source hardware, it's a good thing. Okay, cool.
All right. Well, I think that's probably going to be.
Yeah, we're at 4 o'clock. Yeah, what a nice thing to end on.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I'll also mention, because it's part of this chat with RP2040, as someone who has had to help coordinate Adafruit working with chip companies, this was a different experience. Raspberry Pi did a really good job of, it was like by engineers for engineers. And so we didn't have to go through, and it's just the nature of what happens with large companies, a lot of middle management. It was just straight up, here's the people that are working on the documentation, the hardware, the software, and then here's the engineers that are working on like what Adafruit does. Like we made a feather, and we also brought up CircuitPython. And it was very efficient. And I think the efficiency expresses itself in money. None of us were on like month-long meetings. It was friendly, like NDA, but there was no leaks. And I think it's a really good model of how companies will eventually have to work, especially when you want to take on the giant chip industry. You do need a scrappy bunch of people that are very motivated, and look what the end result is. Pimeroni, SparkFun, Adafruit, Arduino, a few others all had hardware that they're going to be able to release soon. The entire community out there is going to get all this code and software. They're going to be able to release hardware and software. And we didn't really waste any time on anything other than the actual work. So that was very unique and different. And we're all doing this during, one of the biggest challenges for all of us with COVID out there. And maybe that's one of the reasons this worked out well, is because people normally would travel. You'd be in lots of meetings. People would come out different time zones, and you try to coordinate meetings. And that's how a lot of things happened in the past. But this one really worked out well. So more good news for makers out there. Like I said before, this is, I take back what I said maybe even like a couple of years ago. It's like, this is the best time to be into electronics. No, actually right now is the best time to be into electronics. Like right now, this moment, you get the most for the least amount of investment, and you get the most open software and hardware out there than ever before. And you have all these resources and communities, and it's better than it's ever been.
Talking about good resources, this has reminded me a lot of the deep dives that I do on Fridays. So if folks have questions about CircuitPython in general or the chips that it runs on, I've done a lot of work on it. So I do deep dives here on the Adafruit YouTube channel, youtube.com/Adafruit, almost every Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific. It goes for about 2 hours, so we have lots of time to answer questions. So if you have questions about CircuitPython or the chips that they run on, I'm happy to field those there. And that's every week.
What time is it? It's Friday at
2 p.m. Pacific, so 5 p.m.
Friday, 2 p.m.
Eastern.
PST.
And we're always on our Discord. We love to hear from people.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes. It's cool. All right, sweet.
All right, first thanks Dan who set this up. And I guess one behind the scenes thing, we had this S2 chat planned, and I was like, there's this RP2040. So then it came out last week, and I sent it to Dan. I'm like, hey, let's just instead of it just being a half an hour chat, I don't think the folks will mind. And they usually go a little bit longer. And how could we not talk about, there'd be RP2040 questions anyway, so you may as well just do it. Okay. Well, that's everything we got. We'll see some people maybe at our show and tell tonight, 7:30. We got Ask an Engineer at 8 o'clock. And then Scott's Deep Dive is this Friday. And we also have JP's workshop this week.
Oh, well, just because, last thing, just because I know I think probably people asked me, they're like, how do you get RP2040 chips? We don't have any. I literally have 3 left. I got a couple samples. You can contact Raspberry Pi Foundation if you want to get samples. They might be able to hook you up. They're going to have them all available in a couple months. I did not get I don't have special access. All we basically got was Scott got 1 dev board, I got 1 dev board and 10 chips. And that's the extent of it. About a month and a half ago. So as soon as the chips are available, everyone's going to have access. I'm sure we'll stock them. DigiKey's going to stock them. You'll be able to get the chips at the same time I do. There's no exclusion. There's not only I get them. You can get them too. So don't worry about that. You'll be able to pick up a reel.
Yep, and on the software side, I'm bugging folks who are making boards so that we'll have CircuitPython on all those boards as well.
All right. Thank you, everybody. 1 hour.
All right. I'm going to end the chat here.
Sweet. Bye.